What have you done with those plans?
We intercepted no transmissions.
If this is a consular ship, where is the ambassador?
Luke, help me take this mask off.
Now, go, my son. Leave me.
No, you're coming with me. I'll not leave you here. I've got to save you.
You already have. Luke, you were right. You were right about
Coach Lasso!
Walk away. No window.
Stop. Ted, I'm sorry. Biscuits with the boss is not something that I have time for this morning. Or ever.
Coach Lasso is just what we need.
Oh, he's an absolute wanker.
Pardon?
I hope he fails miserably. Ted, I lied to you. I hired you because I wanted this team to lose. I wanted you to fail.
I forgive you. Come on, just shake this hand. Arms start again.
That's supposed to impress me?
You're not? You're gonna. Yeah, that house is full of screw-ups. You know, I guess I shouldn't really be surprised. A bunch of screw-ups in your family. I mean,
leave
your
it.
mom. I mean, I'm not even surprised what happened to your
leave
brother.
it.
I'm sorry, I have to be the one to
Steve,
tell you
shut
that
up.
Myers, their family is a disgrace to the entire.
Steve, listen.
Nancy.
You need to leave.
No, I'm not trying to start anything, okay?
I don't care about them. You
No,
need
no,
to
no,
leave.
listen, I messed up. Okay, I messed up. Okay, really, please. I'm trying to make things right. Henderson. Henderson, he's back. He's back.
I'm back. You got the job.
I got the job. Way! Oh.
Okay, so all of these clips and these characters had something in common. We had Darth Vader / Anakin, who tragically falls from good to evil, and then in his final moments, back to good again. In Ted Lasso, Rebecca Welton goes from being a very brash boss to someone who's vulnerable and a confidant in the office. And then Steve Harrington in Stranger Things trades in being a bully to become someone that the young kids can rely on and look up to. They all share one very indispensable element of storytelling, and that is change. We see change in nearly everything that we consume, in TV and films, obviously, but even in the advertisements we see on YouTube or in books, if any of us find time to read those occasionally. Anything that's meant to grab our attention usually relies on and involves change through storytelling. So let's talk about storytelling as it pertains to research. Researchers usually use storytelling as an engagement tool. There are writers and speakers who specialize in the art of how to create a really good presentation through storytelling. And this is needed, it's necessary, and it's really helpful for making sure information is digestible and that it's clear for those who don't understand a niche topic. It brings out the best in what we've uncovered as researchers. It's like adding salt and butter to popcorn that we could say is like data. It just makes it taste better. But we're here to suggest that researchers can use storytelling for far more than just seasoning up a presentation. It can be more than just a presentational mode. So we'll use Hollywood, obviously, to explore this idea. When we think of Hollywood, we think of something very lavish, full of cool directors and charismatic actors. But the whole facade of Hollywood is really built on one simple foundation, and that is the script. Hollywood is a place where good storytelling is not just the salty addition to the popcorn. It is the popcorn, or more accurately, we could say it's the meat and the potatoes. It's the entire meal. As a result, the most central roles in Hollywood are the ones that have their hand on the script and making sure all the essential elements of a story are included. So anything that hits the market has to meet these certain criteria of storytelling. I worked in Los Angeles for 7 years in two main capacities. The first was in TV development, where we essentially decided what scripts and projects were going to be made and which ones would be put on the shelf or passed on to another network. Later, I worked in a TV writer's room, which can be somewhat hard to explain, but we'll use this clip from 30 Rock to try to show it to you.
Huh. You guys are working hard for once.
Where's my sandwich?
Let's made us do it!
No, it was Frank!
Hey, it was Frank! I'm a patsy, I feel
bad.
Why?
This is all my fault, Miss Lemon, because I let it happen. And the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing.
Please ask my permission before you quote me, Kenneth.
I don't know how, but you're gonna get me another sandwich, or I'm gonna cut your face up so bad you'll have a chin. You'll all have chins!
And as with many things in Hollywood, this is the glamorous version of it. But no, a TV writer's room is essentially a place where a bunch of introverts come together, eat sandwiches, and brilliantly chisel out some amazing stories and narratives. So the two main positions that I had were very different, but they were also really similar. In TV development, we read piles and piles of scripts. And then we had meetings with people, and we talked about those scripts, and we read more scripts. And in TV writing, we wrote pages and pages, had meetings about those pages, and rewrote those pages. So the two jobs boil down to one main goal, and that is discovering new ways to tell the same universal stories that have been told for 100 years since cinema began. Creating stories and scripts is about repetition. It's very taxing and it's hard work. But producers and TV writers do this because they're acutely aware that how they present change is the mechanism by which stories become new and engaging. It's all about the change. So in the opening clips, we saw the audiences won through seeing the characters transition from being potential single-dimensional bad guys into multi-dimensional characters that are complicated and deserve our empathy. So our first question comes, what is it about change that's so effective at getting our attention?
So there are three reasons, effectively. There's the cognitive, there's our social nature, and sort of our vigilance with regards to cultural norms. So as humans, we are extremely attentive to change. Things that break the flow or disrupt a pattern, we automatically hone in on them, especially if there's something important to us that makes a sort of difference to our lives. So why is this the case? Well, it has to do with how we experience things. Now, we tend to think of experience as our bodies picking up lots of sensory data. We see, we hear, we touch, we feel, and so forth. And that all gets transmitted to our brain where we make sense of it. But this is only kind of half of the story. Sort of the most recent findings in neuroscience talk about what we do really is that our brains have a pre-existing mental model based on all our past experiences. And this creates a model of the world for us. And we use these mental models to make predictions, to anticipate what we'll encounter. So, for example, if you're walking down a pavement, now most of you will do this on autopilot. That's because you're just following your brain's mental model of what it is to walk to work or wherever it is you're going. Now, what do our senses do? The role of our senses, then, is to pick up errors in these predictive models of the world. And they sort of help us out. Their mission is to stop us making mistakes. So for example, this banana skin appears, breaks the mental model, our senses pick it up because it's a danger to us, and we walk around it. So we're super attentive to these changes in the environment, and these errors are salient changes in our environments. And they're the kind of things our senses are attuned to. And our cognitive receptivity to change stems from the need to update our mental models of the world. So we keep our eyes peeled for things like banana skins on pavements. But because we're humans, we're inherently an inventive species, we found a way to do something more exciting with this predilection for change and simply ensuring our survival. And this is the social side of it. So what is going on in this image? What is going on with this woman here? What's going on inside her head? What does she see? And these are questions we can't help but ask ourselves. Something's obviously shocked her and surprised her. So even more so than changes in our environment, we evolved to be super sensitive to changes in other people. Our entire bodies, as well as our faces, all evolved these muscles to aid expression and communication, so we can navigate the social world we've created as humans. We're constantly trying to read people, to understand their motivations and intentions, what's going on in their heads. Take Jack Torrance in The Shining, absolutely terrifying. Everyone seen The Shining? Anyone not seen The Shining? I don't want to spoil it. We all kind of know where this goes, don't we? Where we ends up. We were watching the film, waiting for that moment, reading his face. When is he going to break? When is he going to descend into madness? And what the hell the consequence is going to be? Is he going to be resolved? Will he become a hero in the end? Will he see past it? Or will he commit the ultimate sin? People are unpredictable. Just like Jack Torrance, he's very unpredictable. People generally are unpredictable. We can be fickle, moody, and irrational. Even people we know really, really well, we're never 100% certain what that person will do or how they will react. I don't know about you, but when I give my wife a birthday present, we've been married for 13 years, I still am a bit scared of how she'll respond to it, because I just don't know. So we've all been there. So at a subconscious level, we're always monitoring the behavior of others to get a head start on what they may do. And humans are extremely engaging sources of cause and effect. Part of Jack Nicholson's charm is his expressive face. It can express so many different things, where he's trying to figure out what's going on inside his skull there. And this is what drives our engagement with stories, trying to understand and predict the feelings, motivations, and actions of characters. Humans are great deliverers of change, and compelling stories are all about how people change and create change. And the last one is the cultural. A key quality that makes us humans is our distinctly rich cultural lives. Sure, some other species have culture, but it's nothing like human culture. And one of the ways in which culture manifests itself is as cultural norms. We can kind of think of these as sets of rules or conventions about what we can and we cannot do. They kind of differ depending on what country we're in or where we are brought up or where we live and so forth. And they're often very trivial things. For example, tipping in a restaurant, how much do you give? Do you even do it? The kind of language you use in different circumstances. Do you talk to your grandparents or somebody you talk to your children, somebody you talk to your colleagues? How do you dress to go into the office? Everyone got very casual during lockdown. Are flip-flops okay in the office? Does anyone ever let flip-flops in the office? Is this a rule some people might risk breaking? How to talk to people on social media or disagree with someone? How to break up with a boyfriend or girlfriend? Jack Torrance, for example, breaks one of the key rules of being a father. Fathers are there to protect your family, not chase them around a house with an axe. So these might sound very trivial, apart from the Jack Torrance example, but they're often deeply moral issues that evoke strong positive or negative feelings that attract our attention because they matter so much to the values we hold. We become hyper-vigilant about the consequences of breaking these rules and what will follow. They symbolize change. And importantly, the boundaries of these rules aren't always clear-cut. They have a kind of fuzzy quality to them. It's not always clear what's right or what's wrong, as we're going to see in a minute. This is the Friends clip, by the way. Just signal that one just in case. So we're not sure of the consequences. And stories where characters promise to uphold or threaten to break these rules, or where they sail close to the wind, engage our attentions and emotions as we kind of prepare for the fallout of this rule-breaking action.
Jeopardized. I thought we were broken up.
We were on a break.
That, for all I knew, could last forever. That, to me, is a break up.
Anyway, her and Ross just started yelling at each other.
Wait, why was he yelling at her? He's the one who slept with someone else.
Well, I guess he says that because they were on a break when it happened, that she should have forgiven him by now.
Whoa, he is so unreasonable. God. Although, I think I understand what he means.
Right.
I wonder, do the phrases human furniture or footstooling mean anything to you?
Not that I'm conscious of.
Have you ever used another human being as a footstool, Mr. Wamsgans?
Senator, I use a variety of target-oriented incentives to enhance optimal performance.
Attention, everyone. Hello. Yes, I just want you to know that this is not my decision, but from here on out, we can no longer be friends. You can consider this my retirement from comedy. And in the future, if I want to say something funny or witty or do an impression, I will no longer ever do any of those things.
Does that include that's what she said?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Well, you always left me satisfied and smiling, so.
That's what she said! Michael!
Okay, so even though we use some lighthearted examples, stories that break cultural codes are often the most powerful. They tap into strongly held cultural beliefs about what's right or wrong, or how we should or shouldn't act in certain situations. So when we step into a cinema or when we turn on the TV, we do expect a certain pattern to be fulfilled, for our cultural values to be adhered to. And in order for that to happen, characters do need to change to ensure that. So we'll look at the top 3 highest grossing movies to kind of see this in action. In Avatar, Jake Tully is a human who comes to this planet, and his main goal is to exploit their resources. But he does eventually end up defending the Na'vi people of Pandora, and he becomes one of them. In Avengers Endgame, sorry to spoil it for anyone, but Tony Stark starts off the movie very much wanting to retire from his superhero duties. He wants to spend time with his family. But throughout the course of the film, he does end up sacrificing himself in order to save the entire universe. And in Titanic, we meet Rose, who recently got married in order to gain wealth and status. But throughout the movie, she falls in love with Jack, Leo DiCaprio, and she finds true love and is willing to risk everything for that love. So the events of these movies incite the characters to go on a journey. And eventually, their beliefs and their actions align with normative cultural values that most of us all share. So the exploitation of creatures and other people is obviously a bad thing, or self-sacrifice is the greatest virtue, or true love is worth freezing in the ocean for. The increasing popularity of shows that depict people changing for the better is a really great example of this as well. So Ted Lasso, Schitt's Creek, and Call My Agent, all these shows display something that is admired and seen as fulfilling: the cultural choice to choose optimism in the face of challenge. Ultimately, stories, even though they're usually larger than life and not really accurate, alter what we imagine is possible by showing the importance of change. And that is why they're so powerful.
So at this point, you're probably asking yourself, what does all this mean for research? So let's bring it back down to research. A great deal of the work we do is concerned with looking at how to change public perceptions around big issues like poverty, children's needs in conflict, immigration, international development, and so on. It tends to be for NGOs, but also for some commercial brands as well who are interested in this kind of thing, such as how the world will be after COVID, in a post-COVID world. Now, people's perceptions of these big public issues are shaped by the kind of stories they are exposed to in the media, from news stories to TV shows, to movies, to what we see and what we hear on social media. Now, all these stories have different angles, different perspectives, they're told in different ways, but they amount altogether into cultural narratives. And they're narratives because they're based on simple cause and effect principle. So, for example, in the UK, one of the dominant narratives, cultural narratives about war, is that war used to be about good versus evil and making the world a better place. But now it's about power and money, and we can't even trust our own governments and military to make the right choices. Or for overseas development, there's a narrative which is overseas development doesn't work. The developing world is still a mess, and organisations who promise to deliver are inefficient at best or greedy and corrupt at worst. So they explain outcomes, they explain why things are the way they are, why there's been a shift from one state of affairs to another. And these narratives are cultural because they tap into enduring and powerful values around issues like fairness and justice, who has what rights, who deserves help and who doesn't. And people feel incredibly strongly about these issues. These are big emotional issues that really get people in their guts and their chests. And as we've seen with stories more broadly, this combination of cognitive accounting, seeing things repeated and patterns changing, and cultural norms can be extremely potent at engaging people's attention, arousing strong emotions and ultimately driving behaviour. And this includes public support for NGOs, through donations and other activities, such as putting pressure on the government and so forth. So the question for NGOs operating in these spaces is how do we change people's minds and ultimately their willingness to support?
So how is it that Hollywood is able to retell and resell the same stories over and over again? Luckily, a lot of storytelling is about perspective. So historically, glossy movies very much were told from the point of view of a clear protagonist. Anytime a writer sits down to write something, the first thing they have to think about is what point of view is this going to be told from? So a clear protagonist is someone we can align with and that we root for. But over time, what a protagonist looks like has changed, and it's been challenged quite a bit, almost to the point where the protagonist isn't even the most interesting character anymore. And we see that in recent trend to highlight anti-heroes and villains. So we could say The Sopranos or Breaking Bad, but also Disney recently has been retelling a lot of their classic films from the perspective of the villains. And this is, they're objectively bad people, but by going back and seeing their origin stories and why they are the way that they are, it very much in a way aligns with our cultural values because they're humanized through a story that makes sense to us, and thus we're able to empathize with them. And this is all because we're able to shift perspective. So we'll take a look at some of the Disney films. And Cruella, we meet her as a really young girl. She's prodigious, she's very talented, and in a way she's like way too big for the world around her. And so because of that, she's outcasted and looked upon as weird. This becomes vivid, overwhelming, and kind of takes over her identity when her mother is killed by Dalmatians. And thus she becomes the Cruella we know in 101 Dalmatians. In Maleficent, we meet her as a young fairy who lives in a very bright and lush world, but she is betrayed by a human in the kingdom nearby. He cuts off her wings in order to gain power and become king. And thus, in Sleeping Beauty, we meet her when she is putting a curse over Aurora, the Sleeping Beauty. So Disney spotlighting villains is a result of how Hollywood and a lot of other storytellers are making new requests and changing things. So they're propping up new voices, they're bringing in new perspectives and new protagonists, and all of this newness creates these new narratives that we're talking about, ones that reflect how our local and global cultures are changing. So Parasite's a really good example of this. It's a movie that won multiple Oscars in 2019. It forced Americans to read subtitles, which is really exciting. And it was generally loved by critics and audiences alike because it tapped into how we're kind of realigning our cultural values around prosperity and wealth. In Parasite, Bong Joon-ho takes a hilarious and disturbing look at class divide by asking what if the help of a house, who they're all one family, slowly took over the lives of the wealthy family that they serve. So by jumping between the two perspectives of these families, we change the narratives and stereotypes that usually surround people with wealth and the stereotypes that are usually associated with the people who are less fortunate. And it's really powerful what he was able to do and how many people connected to these changing narratives.
So we're going to finish by showing how we applied some of these Hollywood secrets to help Save the Children develop a new campaign that would change perceptions, public perceptions of children in conflict zones. So when the research began, the existing cultural narrative around conflicts and children was very bleak. Modern war was interminable and lacking in moral justification, and children were innocent and passive victims who stood little chance under these conditions. In focus groups, people believed the only way to truly protect children was to end war completely, but obviously they didn't believe this was possible. So this was the first issue we had to overcome. Now, obviously, the majority of people in the UK have never experienced war firsthand, so their understanding of it comes from what they see and hear in the media. And the role of the media is to talk about what is happening in the world, and their war reporting reflected that. But there was also an editorial agenda which emphasised the most negative stories, which they believed were more engaging for audience, and for which they had some evidence. And when children were involved, images like these dominated reporting. They're powerful, upsetting images, so it's understandable why they were often chosen. But this led to the second issue we had to overcome. Children were rarely seen as anything but passive victims, and this compounded audiences' feelings of helplessness. If war is interminable, what hope is there for children? In focus groups, people responded well to more positive images because it gave them a sense of hope and possibility of a brighter future for children. Say, children recovering from injury and so forth. But the problem was that this message couldn't be all positive. Save the Children had to say that war was bad too. There had to be some negativity to accurately convey the danger of war and engage audiences. So what did we do? First of all, we realised that Save the Children had to tell a different story from a different perspective as an organisation from the media. As it was, Save the Children was simply telling the same story as the media as these images show. As you can see, BBC News images, Save the Children images, we can barely distinguish them apart. So it was the media's job to tell people the way the world was. We said to Save the Children, it's your job to change the way the world is. Save the Children had to put change at the heart of their messaging. When we established this, we then needed to be able to tell a convincing story about children being active and future-focused in conflict conditions. First, learning from the role of the protagonist in Hollywood stories, we realised we had to position children as agents of change. When we looked at children, how children were represented in culture, we realised that they possessed unique qualities that adults typically lacked in the context of war and conflict. Bit of context here. In the UK, there was a dual perception of warfare. On the one hand, there's a golden era in the past where wars were fought for just causes and there were goodies and baddies, as typified by the Great Escape. On the other hand, there's a perception of modern warfare where the causes are questionable, if not outright immoral. It's not clear who the goodies and baddies are, if there are any at all. And that's typified by films like Zero Dark 30. And the perception is that in modern warfare, all adults have questionable motives and morals. By contrast, children are perceived as being innocent and pure of heart. Like Harry Potter, Arya Stark, and Spider-Man in the Marvel films, while we obviously couldn't tell a story of children actually fighting, as these examples from films do, we wanted to get underneath the heart of what it meant for children to be heroes. And what we identified was the modern hero was about selflessness, self-sacrifice, and a drive to stand up for and help others. The other important aspect of these Hollywood hero narratives was that our heroes don't have it easy. They have to overcome obstacles and danger to change and enact change. And this fits so well with the kind of story of adversity we needed to tell about children in conflict. So for Save the Children, instead of war becoming a dominant issue, it was about showing us the context in which children overcame adversity and used their newfound strength to help other children create change. We shared a simple 3-part hero's journey, which I won't go through now because I'm running out of time, but it showed how children became heroes by overcoming their disruption and helping others. And then we provided a clear list of things to do. Important ones here are things like making the focus of the narrative about an individual child who demonstrates agency, making children the narrators of their own stories, and featuring war as the adversity, not the narrative focus. And this was a big perspective shift here, that children had to be the narrators of their stories, not the subjects of narration. We had to see the world through their eyes. Instead of being subject to the gaze of the audience became subject to the gaze of a child. And the result was the I Am the Future campaign.
Look at me. Go on, look at me. Don't be shy. What do you say? Maybe I'm a refugee. Or a child bride. forced into marriage. A child soldier, forced to fight. Maybe I'm a story on the news to turn off and forget about. I'm just a child. I want to play with my friends, to run, to laugh. I want to learn. I want to grow. I want my voice to be heard. I want my life to count. I am the future, and I'm worth fighting for.
So as you can see, very different to the images we saw earlier. There's lots of stories on the website as well that follow this structure of children overcoming adversity to help others. Now, although this ad's only a couple of years old, it's helped put pressure on the government to update its approach to protecting civilians in conflict zones. So as we can see, understanding the secrets of Hollywood storytelling can lead to change in some of the most serious issues of the 21st century.